This is a one-man presentation of Charles Dickens' A Christmas Carol, adapted by my friend Clayton Jevney many years ago, and I have taken it and added to it and changed it a bit, so hopefully I've changed it into my own creation. I'd like to perform this for you as a bit of a, hopefully something you enjoy. A Christmas Carol, Chapter 1, Marley's Ghost. Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. And Scrooge's name was good upon change for anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Mind you, I don't mean to say I know of my own knowledge what there is particularly dead about a doornail. I might have been inclined myself to regard a coffin nail as the deadest piece of ironmongery in the trade. But the wisdom of our ancestors is in the simile, and my unhallowed hand shall not disturb it, or the country's done for. You will therefore permit me to repeat emphatically that Marley was as dead as a doornail. Scrooge and he were partners for I don't know how many years. Scrooge was his sole executor, his sole administrator, his sole friend, his sole residual legatee, his sole friend and sole mourner. And even Scrooge was not so dreadfully cut up by the sad event, but that he was an excellent man of business on the very day of the funeral, and solemnized it with an undoubted bargain. Oh, but he was a tight-fisted hand at the grindstone, Scrooge. A squeezing, grasping, clutching, scraping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint. The cold within him froze his old features, nipped his pointed nose, shriveled his cheeks, stiffened his gait, made his eyes red, his thin lips blue. Nobody ever stopped him in the street to say with gladsome looks, "My dear Scrooge, how are you? When will you come to see me?" No beggars implored him to bestow a trifle. No children asked him what it was o'clock. No man or woman ever once in all his life ever inquired the way to such and such a place of Scrooge. But what did Scrooge care? It was the very thing he liked, to edge his way along the crowded paths of life, warning all human sympathy to keep its distance. Once upon a time, of all the good days in the year, on Christmas Eve, old Scrooge sat busy in his counting house. It was cold, bleak, biting weather. The city clocks had only just gone 3, but it was quite dark already. It had not been light all day. The door of Scrooge's counting house was open that he might keep his eye upon his clerk, who, in a dismal little cell beyond, a sort of tank, was copying letters. Now Scrooge had a very small fire, but the clerk's fire was so much smaller that it looked like one coal. "Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew. "Bah! Humbug! Christmas a humbug, Uncle? You don't mean that, I'm sure."
"I do. Merry Christmas. What right have you to be merry? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough."
"Come then, what right have you to be dismal? What reason have you to be morose? You're rich enough."
"Humbug!
Don't be cross, Uncle.
What else can I be when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas. Out upon a Merry Christmas. What's Christmas time to you but a time for paying bills without money? A time for finding yourself a year older but not an hour richer? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should. Uncle, nephew, keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine."
"Keep it, but you don't keep it."
"Let me leave it alone then. Much good may it do you, much good has it ever done you."
"There are many things which I might have derived good, which I have not profited, I dare say. Christmas among the rest. But I am sure I have always thought of Christmas time when it has come around as a kind, forgiving, charitable, pleasant time. The only time I know of in the long calendar year when men and women by one consent seem to open up their shut hearts freely. And therefore, Uncle, though it has never put a scrap of gold or silver in my pocket, I believe it has done me good, and will do me good, and I say God bless it." The clerk in the tank involuntarily applauded. Becoming immediately sensible of the impropriety, he poked at the fire and extinguished the last frail spark forever.
"Let me hear another sound from you, Cratchit, and you'll keep your Christmas by losing your situation." "You're quite a powerful speaker, sir. It's a wonder you don't get into Parliament."
"Don't be cross, Uncle. Come,
Dine with us tomorrow. Good afternoon. I want nothing of you. I ask nothing of you. Why cannot we be friends? Good afternoon.
I am sorry with all my heart to find you so resolute, but I'll keep my Christmas humor to the last, and so
Merry Christmas, Uncle. Good afternoon. And a happy good afternoon. New Year!
his nephew left the room without an angry word, and stepping out, he allowed a stranger to step in. He was a portly gentleman and pleasant to behold, and now stood with his hat off in Scrooge's office.
Scrooge and Marley, I believe. Have I had the pleasure of addressing Mr. Scrooge or Mr. Marley? Mr. Marley's been dead these 7 years. He died 7 years ago this very night.
Well, I have no doubt that his liberality is well represented by his surviving partner. At this festive season of the year, Mr. Scrooge, it is more than usually desirable that we should make some slight provision for the poor and destitute who suffer greatly at the present time.
Are there no prisons?
Plenty of prisons, I know.
And the union workhouses, they're still in full operation.
Well, they are. I wish I could say they were not.
The treadmill and the poor law are in full vigour then?
Both very busy, sir.
Oh, I was afraid from what you had said at first that something had occurred to stop their useful course. I'm very glad to hear it.
A few of us are endeavouring to raise a fund to buy the poor some meat and drink and more warmth. Well, what should I put you down for?
Nothing.
Well, you wish to be anonymous.
I wish to be left alone, sir. Since you asked me what I wish, that's me answer. I don't make merry myself at Christmas time, and I can't afford to keep a lot of idle people merry. I help to support the establishments I have mentioned. Those that are badly off must go there.
Well, many can't go there, sir, and many would rather die.
And if they would rather die, they'd better do it and decrease the surplus population. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Seeing clearly that it would be useless to pursue the point, the gentleman withdrew. At length the hour of shutting up the counting-house arrived, and with an ill will Scrooge dismounted from his stool and tactically admitted the fact to his expedient clerk in the tank, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat.
You'll want all day off tomorrow, I suppose.
If quite convenient, sir.
It's not convenient and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used, I'll be bound. And yet you don't think me ill-used when I pay a whole day's wages for no work.
It's only once a year, sir.
A poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December. But I suppose you must have the whole day off. You'll be here all the earlier the next morning, yeah?
The clerk promised that he would, and ran home to Camden Town as hard as he could pelt to play at blindman's buff. Scrooge took his usual melancholy dinner in his usual melancholy tavern and went home to bed. He lived in chambers which had once belonged to his deceased partner. They were a gloomy suite of rooms and dreary, for nobody lived in it but Scrooge. The yard was so dark that even Scrooge, who knew its every stone, was faint to grope with his hands. Now, it is a fact that there is nothing at all particular about the knocker on the door, except that it was very large. It's also to be borne in mind that Scrooge had not bestowed one thought on Marley since his last mention of his 7 years dead partner that very afternoon. And let any man explain to me, if he can, how it happened that Scrooge, having his key in the lock of the door, saw not the knocker, but Marley's face. It was not angry or ferocious, but looked at Scrooge as Marley used to look, with its ghostly spectacles turned up on its ghostly forehead. The hair was curiously stirred as if by breath or hot air, and though the eyes were perfectly wide open, they were perfectly motionless. As Scrooge looked fixedly at this phenomenon, it was a knocker again. To say that he was not startled would be untrue, but he put his hand upon the key he had relinquished, turned it sturdily, and walked in and lighted his candle. He did pause with a moment's irresolution before he shut the door, and he did look cautiously behind it at first, as if half expected to be terrified with the sight of Marley's pigtails sticking out into the hall. But there was nothing on the back of the door except the screws and the nuts that held the knocker on. So he said, "Had done."